We were sitting at the dining room table when it happened. My family and I were at the home of a businessman in our church. This house set up on top of a hill, 3 stories high. In fact, if you went up to, there was actually a stairway that went up to the roof where there was a lookout, and if you looked far enough, you could see the Pacific Ocean. So on this particular day, we were sitting in the dining room having dinner together. The dining room happened to set over a hill, and it had some pillars or posts that were holding up that part of the house. Just as we were about to cut into our steak, it shook. I mean, there was a sudden shaking. Everybody got up from the table, and they went into the house that was away from the hill and was not, with pillars holding it up. It was a 5.1 earthquake. There are a lot of things in life that can shake us, but God wants us to live with an unshakable faith. And that's what Hebrews 12:15 is talking about when the writer says, "See to it that no one misses the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. Afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, he was rejected. He could bring about no change of mind, though he sought the blessing with tears. You have not come to a mountain that can be touched and that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and storm, to a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word be spoken of them, because they could not bear what was commanded, which was, if even an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned. The sight was so terrifying that Moses said, 'I'm trembling with fear.' But you have come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all men, to the spirits of righteous men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkling blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. See to it that you do not refuse him who speaks. If they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, how much less will we if we turn away from him who warns us from heaven? At that time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. The words once more indicate the removing of what can be shaken, that is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire." The one driving theme through the book of Hebrews is that you must find an anchor for your faith. And the only secure anchor is Jesus. Jesus is better than any other thing that people are grabbing onto in life. As we've seen, the people the writer is addressing are struggling. They're in a storm of doubt because their faith is difficult. Persecution is severe. Temptations are acute. And they've got unanswered questions and prayers. Believing in Jesus has become extra hard for them. And so the writer talks about coming to Mount Zion, he says, the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God. Now it's an image that he's going to use repeatedly in these final chapters. He's using it as a metaphor for what we are doing with our lives. A city represented a place of safety, permanence, and prosperity. Deeply embedded in the memory of these Jewish believers was wandering as nomads in the wilderness. You know, they had left Egypt in search of a promised land, a city that would belong to them, where they could settle, raise their families, and where they could live forever in peace and prosperity. And so all through the Old Testament, their hopes are centered on Jerusalem, which literally means city of peace. In a sense, we're all searching for a city like that, only it's an eternal city, the heavenly Jerusalem. So what is your city? You know, what does your anchor look like? What is your primary source of peace, permanence, and prosperity? We're really talking about the most fundamental issue of life. It's asking, where is your hope? Who or what are you putting your trust in? Who or what are you counting on no matter what? How you answer these questions will drive your life, and depending on the answer, give you the strength to endure. Each of us are choosing a course of life that we believe will give us peace, permanence, and security. So what is that for you? Well, the invitation of Hebrews is to make God your primary source. Choose Him as your chief identity, your chief security, your primary hope, your primary fulfillment in life. Let Him be the foundation of your life. Let Him be your city of peace. Jesus said it this way to His disciples. He said, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, so that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I'm going." And of course, Jesus is the way. Jesus has an eternal city prepared for you. That eternal city is a permanent place of peace and security. And Jesus is the way to get to that city. In fact, He is the city. He's what the city is all about. So we're given two warnings here in verse 14. He says, He has promised, once more, I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. And so you can shake things up to make them more explosive, like, you know, you're shaking up a pop can, which, if it explodes, leaves a sticky mess. Or the other way is an earthquake, where everything that has, without a solid foundation, crumbles and falls apart. You know, we all have earthquake experiences in life. It could be a financial crisis. You know, you lose your money, maybe something happens to your retirement fund, maybe you lose your house. It could be an illness crisis where you see the doctor and he tells you that you have an incurable disease. It could be a relational crisis where you lose an important relationship to you, maybe through conflict or divorce or even death. And the ultimate earth-shaking experience is death. God is shaking the earth, and ultimately, with a lot of things, and ultimately shake it, and everything that's not built on Him as a foundation's going to fall away. It's going to be destroyed. And so the writer says our God is a consuming fire. This is a common image for God's burning away everything that is impure and unclean. In fact, it's said this way by Paul in 1 Corinthians 3:12 and 13. He says, if a man builds on this foundation, the foundation of Christ, using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, his work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each man's work. So this is a sobering reality. Every motive, every action, our responses, are they done for the honor and glory of God? Now, you may have heard this phrase before. Only one life to live will soon be past. only what's done for Christ will last. Only what is done for Christ is eternal and unshakable. Anyone who opens their life to the living Spirit is opening to being considerably shaken. That's because Christ is going to remove everything from your life that's not like Him. He may be shaking you right now, and you may not even understand what's going on. But it's really a sign of His mercy. He's trying to wake you up somewhere in your life. He's revealing a faulty foundation that you may be building your life on. He wants to bring you to a place of true peace, permanence, and security. And that's in Him. When you falsely trust in the wrong thing, God is going to shake it to show you that the only foundation that can survive the final shaking is Christ. And the consuming fire is Jesus Himself. So here in the second half of Hebrews 12, the writer contrasts two different destinations. It's essentially the choice these Jewish Christians are making between Mount Sinai, which is living under the old covenant of rituals and rule keeping, and Mount Zion, the new covenant instituted on the cross and lived out through a Spirit-filled life. And so he says in verses 18 and following, "You have not come to a mountain that can be touched and that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and storm, to a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word be spoken to them, because they could not bear what was commanded, which was, if an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned. The sight was so terrifying that Moses said, 'I'm trembling with fear.'" This is Mount Sinai, which represents, like I said, living by the old covenant, going back to the old Jewish life. This is how people related to God before the coming of Jesus. It was not the direction that they were to be going. It's not the direction we're to be going. You might call it living in the place of earthly fear. If you live this way, if you're trying to just follow rituals and rule keeping, practices, if that's what your relationship with God is all about, you're going to find yourself living in constant fear. So there were several things to know about this old covenant life. For one, it was about a mountain that could be touched. And so the old life was about physical things that you could touch and that you had to do. The temple was full of objects that you could lay your hands on and rituals that you could perform. It was all about externals. And that's what religion is. Following certain external rituals to have a relationship with God. But this is not the most important thing to know about Mount Sinai. What He's really wants you to see is how terrifying this way of life is. He describes it as burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and storm, to a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word be spoken to them. It was a scary experience. The voice of God was so frightening that the people cried out to Moses and they said, "You speak to us and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us lest we die." In fact, if an animal touched the mountain, it would be struck dead. Moses said, "The sight was so terrifying that I'm trembling with fear." This fearful experience points to God's holiness. God is not just a better version of us. He's wholly different from us. He's perfect. He's without sin. That's why in the experience on Mount Sinai, God seems to be distant. He's not inviting people to come close to Him. He's telling them to stay away because He's holy and they are not. Now back in Hebrews 9:8, we're told that there are restrictions around the inner sanctuary, the most holy place. The way into the holy place is not yet opened, it says. The old covenant was all about barriers, restrictions, and had a major message. God is utterly holy, and we are utterly sinful. And so if a Jewish Christian ran back to Sinai instead of running to Christ, what they'd be left with is animal sacrifices to stand between them and God. And we're told that wasn't sufficient. In fact, chapter 10 verse 4 says, it's impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. Going back to that old way of trying to make yourself right with God, anything that we try to do to make ourselves right with God, it's not going to work. For one, you can't get close enough to God to even touch Him with a 10-foot pole. And animal blood doesn't do anything to remove sins or change your heart. So here's the dilemma. How do you find the permanence and joy and fulfillment that comes from knowing God and living for Him if you're too sinful to even be in His presence? So they lived in this state of constant fear. What if we haven't been good enough? What if God's not pleased with us? What if we've gone too far and He wants nothing to do with us? That's what's going to happen when you're living under the old covenant way of Mount Sinai. But Jesus, the writer says, is a bit better city. He says, but you have come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God. You've come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You've come to God, the judge of all men, to the spirits of righteous men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkling blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. So Jesus is the better way. Jesus' crucifixion is certainly similar to Mount Sinai. His crucifixion happened on top of a small mountain. There was darkness all around, rocks split, lightning and thunder flashed, the earth shook. He was absorbing the judgment of a sinful people in the presence of a holy God. So now you and I don't have to approach God in fear, because anything that could ever make God reject us was put on Jesus. He was rejected in our place. Now why would He do that? Because of His great love for us. He took our sin and we were given His righteousness. He was shaken for you so that your life could be unshakable in Him. His life is now in us, and our confidence is now in Him. So there's a great celebration that's going on in heaven because of what Christ has done for us. Revelation describes heaven as the ultimate wedding celebration. Jesus has made possible a relationship with God, not based on works, but based on His grace. While Abel's blood from being murdered by his brother Cain cried out for vengeance, the blood of Jesus cries out for our forgiveness. And now we can worship Him not in the terror of fear, but we worship God acceptably, it says, with reverence and awe. Because in Christ, we can't be shaken anymore. There's nothing to fear. Jesus is the only city that can provide what you need. He's the only God who will embrace you in spite of your sins and failures. He's the only Savior who gave Himself for you so that He could have you forever. Tim Keller says, Jesus is the only God who, when you find Him, will satisfy you, and when you fail Him, will forgive you. In Jesus you have a peace and life that cannot be shaken, and promises that will never fail you. So the writer gives us several warnings of what can shake your faith. In some cases, they might not seem like that big of a deal. The greatest dangers to your faith are not always the huge cataclysmic events in life. It's often the slow, gradual dulling of your heart toward God. It's like having termites in your house that are slowly destroying the foundation. at some point they're going to cause significant damage. The same thing is true of the things that we're about to talk about. So he's going to talk about some things to avoid and some things to embrace. The first thing that you need to avoid is the fallout of broken relationships. He says in verse 14, "Make every effort to live in peace with all men." When there's brokenness in your relationships, it's usually because pride and selfishness have gotten in the way. Somebody is thinking of me first and what I want and what I must have, regardless of how it affects anybody else. Now, of course, we can only do so much if the other person is the cause of brokenness and not willing to do what is necessary for reconciliation. As Paul wrote to the Romans, he said, "Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the sight of everyone. If possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." Right before this, Paul says that how you treat those who you find difficult is how you're supposed to do it. He says, "Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited." So what's he saying here? Well, this is how you're to love your enemies. This is how you are to respond to broken relationships as far as people are willing to receive you. To seek peace means you're the first one to offer forgiveness, even when you were the one who was wronged by somebody else. It means that you take up the towel and wash the feet of those who seek to betray you. Yes, even your Judas. When you do that, it shows that you belong to the city of Christ and the focus is off of your own city. You're seeking to serve Him, not seeking to serve your own selfishness. Then he mentions something that we need to embrace. Live a set-apart life. In other words, live your life as one who belongs to God. Verse 14, "Without holiness, no one will see the Lord." There are two patterns that we can all follow in this world. We're going to choose one or the other. It's either worldliness or holiness. They're opposed to each other. You either live a worldly life or a holy life. Now, sometimes we try to mix the two, and it doesn't really work. If you try to mix worldliness into holiness, well, what you end up with is worldliness and not anything that looks like holiness. Worldliness is any kind of thinking or attitude or lifestyle that's opposed to what God says as pure, righteous, and holy. And holiness, holy actually means set apart. Living a holy life means I'm living a set-apart life. My life is set apart to God alone. I live my life for Him. You have to pursue holiness if you want to have an unshakable life, because otherwise you won't see God, you won't live in God, you won't trust God. You will be saturated and controlled by the world and dulled by what the world says God is, and you'll fail to see the beauty, purity, and glory of Him. When you can't see God, it's going to affect your faith. To pursue Him literally means to hunt Him down. You have to go after Him with all you've got. You must be intentional, relentless in your pursuit of the set-apart life. Charles Spurgeon said, "You will never gain holiness by standing still. Nobody ever grew holy without agonizing to be holy. Sin will grow without sowing, but holiness needs cultivation. Follow it, it will not run after you. You must pursue it with determination, with eagerness, with perseverance, as a hunter pursues its prey." So we're not talking about being holier than thou. People who are trying to get others to see how much better they are than everybody else don't realize how unholy that is. Holiness involves humility. It sees how far short I'm falling and keeps running to Jesus, asking Him to change my heart and make me more like Him. That means you're seeking Him out with your heart. You're in His Word and letting His Word get into you. You're watching how things like TV and media and even your material possessions are getting in the way of honoring God with your life. You refuse to be influenced by the world and are relentlessly pursuing everything that will influence you for God. The third thing he talks about, and this is something to avoid, is avoid serving idols in your heart. He says in verse 15, "See to it that no one misses the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many." This is really a warning about idolatry. It's not clear to us in this verse about what he's talking about, but it's talking about idolatry. The root of bitterness is a quote that actually comes out of Deuteronomy 29:18, where Moses is renewing the covenant with Israel. And so we can finally see what this is really about. He says there, "You saw among them their detestable images and idols of wood and stone, of silver and gold. Make sure there is no man or woman, clan or tribe among you today whose heart turns away from the Lord our God to go and worship the gods of those nations." Then notice this, "Make sure there is no root among you that produces such bitter poison." When a root of idolatry starts growing in your heart, it works like poison. It's slowly killing your soul from the inside out. Now, idolatry is usually subtle. It's not like you're bowing down to a statue somewhere. It starts happening when you give worldliness a place in your heart. Materialism, certain ideologies, a person that you want to please, whatever you start putting ahead of God in your heart is the issue. The bitterness is not so much a feeling, but it's centered around a person, someone who's abandoned the way of God and is even leading others astray. So you need to watch out for anyone or anything that seeks to lead you away from your soul devotion to Christ. Another thing to avoid, he says, watch out for the dangers of self-gratification. Verse 16, "See that no one is sexually immoral or is godless like Esau, who for a single meal sold his inheritance." For a single meal, Esau gave away his future. A single meal. There are two examples of self-gratification the author gives us here: being controlled by food and sexual immorality. There are a lot of other things he could have mentioned. Just think about how people arrange their lives around feeling good. Seeking to feel good can keep you from enduring through the hard things. You end up living by your feelings instead of by faith. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to feel good, but when you put the desire to feel good above doing what honors God, and you actually try to deal with those desires in ungodly ways, then that shows that God is not really in control of your life. It's a life of self-gratification. And in the end, it leaves you feeling empty, full of shame, and it will eventually make you a slave of those desires. But there's something far more important in life than the sensations in your body. The addictiveness of immorality or bodily comforts can keep you drugged and blind to what really matters. In his book, Return of the Prodigal Son, Henri Nouwen writes, and he says, "Our addictions make us cling to what the world proclaims as the keys to self-fulfillment. Things like accumulation of wealth and power, attainment of status and admiration, lavish consumption of food and drink, and sexual gratification without distinguishing between love and lust. These addictions create expectations that can't but fail to satisfy our deepest needs. As long as we live within the world's delusions, our addictions condemn us to futile quests in the distant country, leaving us to face an endless series of disillusionments while our sense of self remains unfulfilled. In these days of increasing addictions, we have wandered far away from our Father's home. The addicted life can aptly be designated a life lived in the distant country. it is from there that our cry of deliverance goes up. So it should be no surprise that Hebrews goes on to say about Esau, afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected. He could bring about no change of mind, though he sought the blessing with tears. So you can't really know the blessings of faith while you're trying to satisfy out-of-control desires. You end up suffering consequences that affect the future of what God has in mind for you. The blessings that could be yours in this life are ultimately sacrificed on the altar of self-gratification. And so living by gratification leads to death. But living by faith leads to life. In fact, the best possible life. And so he says, finally, number 5, give your full attention to God's voice. See to it that you do not refuse him who speaks. If they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, how much less will we if we turn away from him who warns us from heaven? So whose voice are you going to listen to? The voice of selfishness and pride? The voice of the world trying to pull you in its direction? The voices of the spiritual forces of evil trying to take over your heart? The voice of bodily cravings demanding immediate gratification? Or is it going to be the voice of God? Imagine this scene in your head. You're playing baseball with Jesus. You probably never thought of doing that with him. You're the pitcher, and Jesus is the catcher. He settles into his crouch behind home plate. He's all ready to play, and you look for his signals. What pitch does he want you to throw? So he signals a fastball, and you think for a moment, and you shake your head. No fastball. He signals a slider. You're not comfortable with that one either. Nope. He gives you a third signal, and you say, no way, that's not for today. Jesus then silently and slowly withdraws his hand back into the mitt. He decides to let you throw whatever you want. Is it any wonder when that happens that he stops sending us his signals? Should it be surprising that your life with him never seems to go anywhere if you stop listening? On Mount Sinai, the Israelites heard the grumbling thunder of God's voice and they trembled. They were so shaken with fear, they couldn't stop shaking. We need to listen to the voice of God speaking to us from the city of Jesus. Pay attention to everything he did for you in Jesus. Pay attention to everything he's trying to teach you now by putting your trust in him. You will not find life by going back to your old lifestyle, driven by practices and fear. You'll find life by taking seriously what God says and living by faith, walking with him in the direction he wants you to go. Linda Stone says, continuous partial attention is our new normal. You know, we live distracted lives. We find it difficult to give our full attention. But you must give Jesus your full attention. Jesus Christ did not lay down his life so that you would initially accept him and then just ignore him the rest of your life. Do you think that by making him a secondary thought in your life that you'll escape the consequences of not taking him seriously? A lack of seriousness is what keeps a lot of people from experiencing the life God has for them. J.C. Ryle said, God is serious in observing us. Christ is serious in his death for us. The Spirit is serious in striving with us. The truths of God are serious. Our spiritual enemies are serious in their endeavors to ruin us. Poor lost sinners are serious in hell. Why then should we not be serious too? One day Christ is going to return, and the earth will experience a shaking like it's never experienced before. All things that are not of God's kingdom will be overthrown and destroyed. We need to take God seriously, the writer says, Since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. When Jesus returns, He'll remove everything that is not of Him, so that our lives burn with a passion for everything that is Him. And in eternity, you will be shaken with the awe of who God is, and that He wants you to be with Him forever. You don't have to live a shaken life here. You can have an unshakable faith if you're putting your trust completely in Him. I want to thank you, dear God, that you move in our lives. And perhaps this morning, we need to be shaken in some place in our life that is not where you want us to be. If that's the case, dear God, stir our souls today so that we hear your voice, and may we respond to your Spirit so that we are putting our full trust in you. You will never fail us. You will lead us all the way. You will give us that which is more valuable than anything the world can offer.